Chagiga Daf is the last daf in the first parak of the Masechta. It'll take us to and begin the next parak in the Masechta. Until the end of the parak, the Gemara is referring to a Mishnah which we have just seen, which lists different types of halachos and categorizes them based on how strong their sources are in the psukim. The Gemara will comment on one that has a lot more halachos than it has psukim. The Gemara will compare the halachos of Negayim and Ahalos as far as those are concerned. Then the Gemara will discuss the 5 categories that are listed as having a very strong source. The Gemara will say, what is this source of which you're referring to? That'll end the parak. And the next parak discusses not halachos chagiga in the beginning, but the halachos of what you're allowed to learn and how many people are allowed to learn it together. The Gemara will explain why there's an issue in what you're allowed to learn and how many people are allowed to be involved at once. So let's begin. The Gemara starts with the Brisa. We're starting a few lines into the daf at the 2 dots. The Gemara quotes the Brisa, which says that the rules of Negayim, that's Tzaras, and Alos, that's things that cause Tumah to spread within a room or under a ceiling. Those halachos are considered to have very few psukim and lots of halachos relatively. So Gemara asks right away, in Negayim, the rules of Tzaras have a lot of psukim. You have the entire Parshas Tazria and Mitzvah almost devoted to those halachos. So how could you say it's few psukim? So Gemara says, yeah, we have to adjust the language over here. It should really say, Negayim has a lot of psukim and few halachos, meaning few mishnayos describing the halachos, while Ahalos, on the other hand, has few psukim and a lot of halachos. There are 30 prakim of mishnayos and Masechos Ahalos. Gemara says, why do I need you to tell me that? I need you to tell me that so that if you're not clear about a certain halacha, if it's in Negayim, look in the psukim because the mishnayos are few, and if it's in Ahalos, look in the mishnayos because the psukim are few. All right, now the Gemara discusses the 4 types of halacha, 4 categories of halacha, which our Mishnah said have a strong source. Now the Gemara understands a strong source means that there's something which is not explicit in the pasuk, but is derived, but the derivation is strong. The Gemara will ask, what are we referring to when we say that there's a strong source? What is the halacha which is not clear, but we have a strong source to derive it? And the 5 types of halachas that are mentioned in the Mishnah in this category are those of dinim, that's monetary laws, avodas, which are karbonos, the laws of taharos, purity, laws of tumah, that's impurity, and laws of arayos, which is illicit relationships. So that'll take us to the end of the parak. So first, the Gemara says the rules of dinim, the monetary laws. What's not clear over there? So the Gemara says that's a reference to the rule that if somebody kills somebody else, he needs to pay for him. That is if he kills accidentally. Obviously, if he murders him, then he himself is liable to the death penalty. But if he kills someone accidentally, Rashi explains he has intent to kill one person, instead he kills somebody else, then he needs to pay the value of that person's life. And this is the meaning of the pasuk that says nefesh tachas nefesh, you give a soul for a soul. You don't actually kill one person as punishment for killing somebody else by accident. Instead, you need to pay for it. Versus, how do you know that a soul in place of a soul means payment, the value of a soul? Maybe it means you actually have to kill the person. Gemara says no, it's learned from the fact that the word nisina is used. It says nosan, v'nosato nefesh tachas nefesh. And earlier the word nosan is also used in context where it's clearly money. That's discussing where somebody caused a woman to miscarry, needs to pay for it. And there it says v'nosan b'flilim. Therefore the word nosan connects both the previous halacha and this current halacha, and that is our source, that you need to pay for it and not to be killed for it. Okay, next category of halacha is karbanos. Gemara says, what's the halacha there that has a source? That's the halacha that you need to do kabbalas hadam. You need to catch the blood flowing from the spot of slaughter, and that's considered an avoda. Now, nowhere does the Torah actually say to do kabbalas hadam. Instead, it says v'hikriu b'nei Aaron hakohanim es hadam v'zarku es hadam mizbeach. It says that they should bring it to the mizbeach and they should apply it to the mizbeach. Well, if you're going to bring it to the mizbeach and apply it to the mizbeach, you obviously have to catch it first. That's kabbalas hadam. You have to catch it in a kli. Now, the Torah never spells that out. It just gives you that oblique reference that you have to do it, because it's referring to the catching of the blood as bringing the blood. The reason that it's doing that is to teach you that has the same halachos. Bringing the blood has to be done. The bringing of the blood has to be done by a kohen with bigdei kahuna, with the proper machshava. Otherwise, it becomes pigul. These halachos all apply to catching the blood, and that is the source for that halacha. Okay. Next category of halachas are taharos, rules of purity. The Gemara says, what's that referring to? The Gemara says that's referring to the size of a mikvah. What is the minimum size of a mikvah? It doesn't say that explicitly, but it does say that he should wash his body in water. That means that the water has to be enough to wash the entire body at once. The minimum size water is that the average person can fit into all at once. And Chazal say that is a 3 cubic amma area. So that would be 3 tvachim by 3 amos by 1 amma by 1 amma. The Gemara says that in volume that's measured as 40 sa. Okay, next is the halachas of tumah, the halachas of bringing impurity. The Gemara says that's referring to the minimum size of a sheretz that is metame, which is the size of an adasha, the size of a lentil. How do you know that? Again, it's not explicit, but it's learned from the psukim describing tumas of shratzim, and it says as follows. It says v'chi. It says Eilat meim lechem b'chol sheretz kol hanagea b'hem b'moisam yitma ad ha'erev. So it says kol hanagea b'hem. Anyone who touches them. That implies you have to touch the entire creature in order to become tamei. But then afterwards, in the next passage, it says yipol alav mehem. Any part of them which falls on you. That would imply even the tiniest part. So it says bahem, the entire sheretz has to fall on you. It says mehem, even a tiny bit of the sheretz has to fall on you. So we make a compromise between the two, and there's the minimum size. The minimum size is the minimum size that you could find such a creature that qualifies as a sheretz, which is, the Gemara says, a chomet, a newborn snail, and that is the size of a lentil, and therefore that's the size that you use. Now, Rabbi Yaisi by Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara says, gives a different source for this size, and that's that the tail of a lizard, which is cut off, is a dead part of an animal. It can convey tama, but it trembles even after it's cut, and that seems to indicate that it's as if it had its own life, and therefore that's called the minimum size. The minimum size is the tail of a lizard, which is also about the size of a lentil. Okay, now the last category is arayis. That's forbidden relationships. The Gemara says, what is the halacha there? That's not explicit. That has a strong source. The Gemara says that's the halacha that one is forbidden to be together with a daughter of his who's born from a woman other than his wife. That is, the daughter is born out of wedlock. That it does not say when the Torah describes the halacha that it's forbidden for a man to be together with his daughter. It only refers to it as the daughter of his wife. What if it's the daughter of a different woman? His daughter through a different woman. So the Gemara says that's learned from Igzei Shava. It says the word heina in 2 different psukim, and it says the word zima in 2 different psukim. So that is to tell me 2 halachos. One, that it's forbidden, and another, that the punishment of sreifa applies to both of them. Now, the Gemara ends off with one final statement. Our Mishnah had said about this last category of psukim, of halachos, that have a clear source, hein gufei HaTorah. This is the body of the Torah. So the Gemara says, why are only these the body of the Torah? They're all body of the Torah. The Gemara says, yeah, you have to change over here the wording. It should be hein v'hein gufei Torah. All these halachas, both the ones with a strong source and those with a very small source, are all considered equally to be the body of Torah. Okay, that ends the parak. Now we begin the new parak, which is parak ein darshin, which means we cannot learn. So it says as follows: we cannot learn certain halachos with too big a group, because it's going to cause misunderstandings. What are the halachos we're speaking about? So the halachos of arayis, that is forbidden relationships. The learning, not halacha, but of Maisa Bereshis, the creation of the universe. And the Torah of Maisa Merkava, description of the spheres of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the malachim, and what goes on over there. Those are all restricted. What are the restrictions? So the language of our Mishnah is as follows. Arayas cannot be studied with 3. That means the maximum is 2. The Gemara understands that this means the teacher and the student, so only one student is allowed. Now, Ma'aseh Bereshis cannot be studied with 2 people. That would mean that you cannot have a teacher and a student. It could just be one person learning on his own. And then Ma'aseh Merkava, that cannot be learned even by an individual. That means that nobody could be allowed to learn that. Now, the Mishnah then says, unless he's smart and understanding on his own. the Gemara is going to say that is contradictory, because if you said nobody can learn it, how can you say somebody who's smart and understanding is allowed to learn it? The Gemara will change its understanding of the entire situation. Now the mission continues, and it says there are 4 things which are not allowed to study at all, and that's what's above, what's below, what's before, and what's after. Some discussion in the Rishonim what this refers to. Above and below refers to, Rashi says, the highest levels of the spiritual world, above the Chayos. Below means what's just below the level of the Chayos. What's before and after, other Rishonim learn what is before the creation of the universe and what will happen after the universe, meaning what will happen in the future. Now, the Gemara says that the Mishnah, that is, says that anyone who studies these 4 things is better off having not been created, because he doesn't care for the honor of his creator, of his master, and he's better off not having been made. Okay, the Gemara begins now. The Gemara asks, I don't understand. You said that no one is allowed to study Maisa Merkava. That you said that an individual cannot study Maisa Merkava. That obviously is referring to somebody who's able to learn on his own. If he can't learn on his own, then there's no such thing as him studying Maisa Merkava. Doesn't know what he's talking about. You're referring to someone who's capable of learning it, so obviously he's wise and understanding. You're saying he's not allowed to. Then in the next time you say that somebody who's wise and understanding is allowed to. So which is it? So the Gemara says we have to revise our entire understanding of the Mishnah. The numbers that are given are not the numbers of the student together with the teacher, it's the number of students only. So the phrase has to be changed from Ein Darshan Bi'arayis B'shlosha to Ein Darshan Li'arayis B'shlosha. You cannot give a shir in Arayis 2-3 people. So we're saying, therefore, that to teach the halachos of Arayis, you cannot have 3 people, the maximum is 2 people. To teach the Maisa Bereshis, you cannot teach to 2 people, you can only teach to 1 person, aside from the teacher, and Maisa Merkava can only be studied by 1 person alone. It cannot be taught, and that person has to be somebody, and that 1 person can learn on his own, of course, obviously if he's on the level, but you can teach to 1 student. The exception is you can teach to 1 student. If he's particularly wise and understanding, then you're allowed to. Okay, now the Gemara says, what is the reason? What is the problem with teaching Arayas to 3 people at once? That is besides from the teacher. So the Gemara tries a couple of sources. The Gemara says, first of all, maybe it's because when the Torah describes Arayas, it says, Ish akol she'er b'sara lo sikru l'galas erva ani Hashem. So Ish is 1 person. Ish again is the 2nd person. Kol she'er b'sara is the 3rd person. And it says you should not sit together, you should not sikru l'galos erva, you should not sit together to learn the halachos of Arayas, to reveal the secrets of Arayas. The Gemara says that the problem is, if that's a valid drasha, the phrase Ish Ish appears in other places also. It says Ish Ish ki kalo elokav, someone who curses, blesses as it were Hashem. Ish Ish shayitim mizera lamelach, someone who serves avodah zarah by bringing his children to Molech. So you want to say also that there Ish Ish refers to 2 people, and it's only a problem if it's 2 people. That's obviously not true. We have a different drasha for that, and that's that Ish Ish is to include a non-Jew, that this applies to Nachrim as well. So they are also obligated, they are also commanded in not cursing Hashem and not serving avodah zarah, which are 2 of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So the Gemara says, so if that's the drasha there, well then that drasha applies here also. It says Ish Ish, as far as Arayas, that applies to Nachum as well. They were also included in the Ish Arayas. It's also 1 of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So the Gemara says, okay, I have to give you a different source, that you're not allowed to study with 3 people in 1 class, and that's where it says Ushmartem es mishmarti. So Ushmartem is plural, that's 2 people. Es mishmarti is the 3rd person. And the continuation, there is a vilti asas mechukas hatoevos aila. You should not do these toevos, meaning you shouldn't learn the rules of these toevos. You shouldn't learn about Arayas. So the Gemara says the problem with that is that we find a similar phrase Ushmartim in other places as well. It says Ushmartim has a Shabbos, Ushmartim has a mitzvos, which is a matzos, Ushmartim has mishmar sakodesh. All these things we don't say. You're not allowed to teach it to 2 people. So what then is the source? So the Gemara says it's not learned from any pasuk, it's logic. You cannot discuss the halachos of Arayis, which are not written explicitly, because people will get it wrong. If you have 2 people sitting in front of you, so even if the Rebbe is discussing the halacha with 1, the other person has no one else to talk to, so he's listening. But if you have 3 people, then when the Rebbe is discussing with 1, the other 2 will talk to each other and not hear the Rebbe, not understand, and end up with the wrong halacha. Therefore, we cannot have more than 2 people sitting in front of the Rebbe at one time discussing these halachos. Now, the Gemara says if that's true, so that should be true for any halacha. We don't want mistakes in any area of halacha. Where it says, no, it's particularly problematic here because since one has strong desires for arayas, one will end up getting the halacha wrong because he has deep down, he wants to get the halacha wrong, he wants to permit something which is forbidden. And the source for that is, we have a statement of the Amoraim listed in Maseches Makos that arayos, that is forbidden relationships, and theft, a person has a natural desire for them. So the Gemara says, okay, now I understand why it applies to arayos, but it should also apply to theft. You just said a person has a natural desire for theft also. You should also not be allowed to learn the halachas of theft in a group of 3. So Gemara says, no, because theft and arayos both have strong desires attached to them, but the desire for theft is only when you see something in front of you that you can steal. It's only when it's in front of you. When you're discussing halacha, you're not going to have a temptation to learn the wrong halacha to permit stealing if there's nothing in front of you. However, arayos, that is a temptation which exists at all times, even if it's not a current situation, and therefore a person may have unwitting motivation to learn the halacha wrongly. The Gemara now continues, refers to the next part of the Mishnah where we said that you cannot discuss Ma'aseh Bereshis, that is the creation of the universe, to two Talmidim, only to one. The Gemara says, what's the source of that? And the pasuk in Devarim, which says, Ki sha'alna liyamim rishonim asher hayu lefanecha. When you ask, please ask about the early days, the time before you, that is all the way back to the creation of the world. So Yomim Rishonim refers to Ma'aseh Bereshis, and it says Ki Sha'al, no, when you will ask, but it says Sha'al in Lashon Yachid, singular. So only one person is allowed to ask a Rebbe about those things at a time. He cannot teach to 2 people together. So Gemara says in this Brisa, so 2 people cannot learn Ma'aseh Bereshis together, but how do you know that one is not allowed to learn before Ma'aseh Bereshis at all, even one person? So that's because it says L'min hayom asher bara Elokim adam al haaretz. The next part of that same pasuk continues as you could go back to the day that Hashem created man on the universe. The Gemara says that indicates you can't go before then, so you can't discuss the 6 days of creation that preceded the creation of man. So the Gemara says no. To counteract that, it says the Yomim Rishonim, the early days, the first days, which are before the creation of mankind. So you fit them together by saying you're allowed to discuss from the creation of the universe, from day 1, from the first of the 6 days of creation, on forward. That's from just before the creation of mankind. You cannot, however, discuss what has happened before Ma'aseh Bereshis. Now, how do you know, says the Brisa, you can't discuss what is above and what is below? So that's because the next phrase in the same pasuk says from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe. You can only talk about things within the universe, not things that are outside the universe. You cannot ask what's above, what's below, what's before, and what's after.